Today is Thursday, November the 8th, 2012, and Joe Turner and myself, Judy Meyer, are talking to Dave Neubauer. Is that how you pronounce your last
David
name?
J. Neubauer.
How do you spell your name?
N-E-U, B as in boy, A-U-E-R.
Dave, I'd like to start off with asking you, where were you born?
I was born in, I was born at DePaul Hospital in the city, but we were living at 8740 Susan Avenue in St. John's, near Brown and Rock Road.
Okay. Would you mind telling us what year?
Yeah, I was born July 21st, 1940. And I always like to say that I was born one day ahead of the famous the interlocking tower, Union Station, burning down to the ground.
What is that all about?
Well,
For those of us who don't quite
That's
remember
where
that.
all the trains coming into Union Station, all of them, they don't run through like the Amtrak station of today. All the trains had to come in and back into the station. So they come in and they cross, the tracks cross each other, and they all, on all 32 something tracks that come in Union Station, the interlocking tower was a controlling device with all the signals and everything else, and the track switches to come in the station. But due to some situation, the tire burned down, and all the switches had to be thrown by hand, and everything had to be, all the signals and everything had to be run by people on top of the cars and so forth, with hand signals by day and lanterns by night. And they had to do that for several months until they could find a new interlocking unit, which the Pennsylvania Railroad had at some place, and they moved it in. And it took about 3 months before they got it back in service.
Were there a lot of casualties?
No, there's no casualties. It's just that the place burned up. Everybody got out, but so.
And this was down off Market Street?
This was right at Union Station's at Market and 18th, and this tower is about a block west in the middle of the yards. So, yeah, that.
So you were born one day before
I was
that?
born July 21st, and it burned on the 22nd of 1940.
It's a nice claim to fame there.
Yeah. So I lived in St. John's. I went to. You want me to tell the school thing?
Sure.
So I went to grade school at Our Lady of the Presentation, just a block or so, 2 blocks south of Brown and Rock Road. And of course the public school kids went to Home Heights School, and I walked past Home Heights, going back and forth if I came home for lunch at school. And in kindergarten, I went to the Catholic church in school, and I just assumed that the kids that went to the Home High School went to the public church, but that wasn't quite true. Grew up there, went to Mercy High School over in University City, as most Catholic kids did at the time. If I'd gone to Rittner, which was real close, I could have been in the marching band, but that wasn't to be. So then and of course, at the age of 15, while still going to high school, I started working at the wrap store in St. John's at McKibben and Rock Road.
Now, what wrap store are you referring to?
Well, it's wrap store number 7. It's right on 8707 St. Charles Rock Road, right at McKibben. And
What was wrap store?
well, okay, let me do a real quick history of that. Fred P. Rapp was a supermarket chain in 1955, just as Joe Bettendorf in the same parts of the city, he had a chain of stores. In 1958, Bettendorf and Rapp merged, and they became Bettendorf Rapp. In 1961, a company called Allied Supermarkets out of Detroit came in and bought them, still operating by the name Bettendorf Rapp up until 1970, when Schnucks, I was with Rapps, and then I went with Schnucks in 67, but when I did, they only had 7 stores. In 1970, Schnucks bought out Bettendorf, buying 25 of the 32 stores, not taking the other 7 because they were like right across the street from several locations that Schnucks had.
Now, when you say you worked for Rapp, was this when you were in high school?
Yeah, I was still in high school. I actually started at my birthday was July of, I was 15 in July of 1955, just turned 15, So I was roughly 14, and I started working for Raps the next month in August of '55, just at the age of 15.
What did you do for them?
Well, just at that time I was a bagger, and at the carryouts we had these big metal tubs that people would come in and put groceries in, and you'd carry them out to the car. I remember this one guy that I ran into in recent years, the last 10 years, that was a customer back then in '55. He worked for Union Electric, and he would buy like $75 worth of groceries a week back then, and he'd walk out with about 12 bags, and he'd buy 6 dozen eggs every week. And of course, he did have a heart attack later in life, but that's what it was.
Maybe he had a big family.
Well, he was a lineman for Union Electric too, so he had a pretty, muscular type job.
I see. So, you graduated from Mercy High School?
Yeah, I graduated from Mercy in June of '58, and I went on to St. Louis University for a year and a half, but that wasn't a good move. I should have just gone right into the grocery business because I was not set up. Well, my life structure was didn't seem like it was set up to be an accountant as I thought it might be. But prior to that time, I mean, all this kind of interaction on different years. You want me to mention about the WF&P? I've been involved with that for 60 years.
What is it?
The Wabash, Frisco, and Pacific. It's a 12-inch gauge steam railroad, runs along the Merrimack River now. But back when I joined in 1953, it was at Brown and Natural Bridge. And it was at Brown and Natural Bridge from 1939 to 1959. And I joined the group in May of 1953 at the age of 12. And now 60 years later, I'm still an active member of that organization.
What does the organization do for those of us who are not familiar with that?
Well, we run amusement park-sized steam passenger trains along the Merrimack River out of a little burg called Glencoe, which is now one of the neighborhoods, you might say, of the city of Wildwood. Glencoe's like one part, Pond is another part, Grover is another part. So anyway, we run out of Glencoe. We run every Sunday, May through October. We haul about, in just 26 Sundays from the first Sunday in May to the last Sunday in October, we haul about 13 to 15,000 passengers every year.
Wow! Oh my gosh!
Yeah. It's quite, it's quite an amazing operation. It really is.
And they've been operating since you were...
Well, we started in '39. We were at Brown Road till July 19th, 1959, because the property values around the airport were getting to be, were going up, and the fellow that owned the property of Brown Road realized this, so he went into negotiations that they built a Ramada Inn there for several years. So the railroad didn't have any place to go. We had to look around. Of course, we knew we weren't going to be moving to Ladue. We had to find a dumpy end of the area, And of course, Glencoe really fit the bill. I mean, it wasn't exactly a Hooverville, but which is something else you can go on with all these historical terms, Glencoe was basically a river. A community where people used to live in these houses built with stilts on them because the Merrimack River flooded a lot. So we found Glencoe in early 1961. We had to tear up all the track and move all the locomotives and everything else, and it was quite a chore.
And was this all volunteers that did this?
Been all volunteers all these years. And we didn't find Glencoe right away. We had to leave Brown Road in July of '59 and tear up everything, and we stored a lot of our stuff at the Museum of Transport for about 2 years. And then found Glencoe, and of course, I mean, it was really rough. All we had was, we didn't have any income of any kind except membership dues, and that was very minimal. We had a lot of these houses which we had for renters in them, And of course, the people living out there were I don't know what you call them rejects, but people that moved up here, moved to the St. Louis area for jobs and stuff out of rural Arkansas, and the rural Arkansas flavor was in there. It was pretty rough out there. I mean, I got the impression that like at nighttime they burned crosses on the lawn. They probably didn't, but it had that sort of a tense atmosphere in the early '60s.
Now, while you were involved in this and you graduated high school and you went to, you say, St. Louis University,
For sure, yeah.
and then you decided that really wasn't for you. Were you working at the
Yeah, I was working at Bettendorf's Bettendorf Raft in St. John, and of course I was found my future wife at that store.
What was her name?
Eileen Miller. She lived out in St. Anne's, and her family, her mom and dad, brother, and our grandfather who lived in St. John's, the family lived in St. Anne's, would come in the store every Saturday and shop, and she was a gorgeous blonde, and I thought, and I was, back then I was Mr. Nerd and Mr. Quiet, and didn't know, do you do this or do you do that? So one day I headed over to the water fountain by the bakery department, cut her off at the water fountain and asked her a name, but then I didn't know where she lived. And when I went to Mercy, I remembered a certain gal by the name of Nancy Langelier that lived out in St. Anne's. So I eventually called her to find out Eileen's address and phone number. And so I was working there, going out with Eileen, and we decided we were going to get married in '61. But at the same time, there was a possibility of getting drafted, so I joined the 6-year reserve program at the 102nd Ozark Infantry Division.
The Ozark.
Ozark, the 102nd Ozark Reserve Infantry Division. It was strictly a St. Louis operation, mainly.
What was going on in '61 that there was fear of you getting drafted?
Well, you had the Cold War. Well, in '61, men were still being drafted. The draft was still there. Everybody had to sign up for the selective service, and men got drafted. It was just a normal thing. Not like today where nobody even remembers it hardly anymore.
Right.
And so instead of getting drafted and have to go in for 2 years of service and still come out and still have to serve 4 years, 2 years active and 2 years inactive in the reserves, I just went in the 6-month program where I went to Fort Leonard Wood for 6 months, and actually it was in a program which I really liked. I was a clerk typist and learned about personnel records and I was the battery clerk. I was also the payroll clerk, and then of course later on over the years I became a supply sergeant, but that was up near the end when I got out.
So were you involved with this for 6 years?
Yeah, we went 6 months active duty, Fort Leonard Wood, and then every 2 weeks during the summer we went to Camp McCoy up in Wisconsin for active duty training. You know, they'd run around the woods with guns and shooting, and guns firing over you, big artillery pieces firing over your head, and tanks rolling around. And of course they had the division band. I never thought about it. I also played music. I started in high school, and
what kind of instruments do you play?
Well, I played 4 different instruments in high school, which didn't exactly build up my whatever in the one. I started out on a C melody sax at Mercy, which is now extinct. There might be found in a museum or some music store someplace. And the second year, my parents bought me a B-flat tenor, which I still have, and I played that for a lot of years. The third year, the school got a bass clarinet. I played that. Fourth year, the school got a bassoon. You know, and I tried playing that, and I did fairly well. But the problem is the bassoon is bass clef, and trying to remember bass clef and treble clef, it was a conflict. So when I went to St. Louis U, they had a baritone sax that was available, and the baritone sax is the biggest one of the ones used nowadays. There are several others, but you'd only find them in artsy bands, I guess. But the baritone sax really something I liked. I played it in the band, in the ROTC band, and then later when I got ROTC, it went away. I didn't have any way of thinking about it. But well, then of course I went in reserves. I mean, when active duty came back and went in 3rd of April of '60 and got out in October of '60. And then went along working, and in December of '60, a guy at the wrap store, he broke his leg and they needed somebody full time, so I was able to go full time in '60.
And what were you doing then?
I was I think I was the receiver by then, which is the guy the stuff comes in the back doors, you check them out and mark the bills and sign the bills and stamp them and all that sort of thing. And then and then of course Eileen and I got married on November 11th, 1961.
Where was your wedding?
At St. Gregory's out in St. Anne's. It's now called Holy Trinity Parish after all the recent mergers. We bought a house, which is kind of rare. Most people get married and have to live in an apartment. We never did have to do that. And of course, over the period of all this time, I've only lived in 3 houses in my life. So I moved from St. John's to our new house was in Meadowbrook Downs at the south end of Oberlin on 2006 Wismer. And we lived there, and of course, had children. And by the time we had our third child going on to the 4th, the house was really getting to be really small, so we looked for a bigger house. And we looked over in Glenwood over in Maryland Heights, which was being built at the time. They were a little too expensive also. So we found the house where I lived in now, 1569 Bill Angela in Hazelwood. And it wasn't in Hazelwood then, it was Hazelwood Post Office. So we moved there, and then we had our 4th child, and of course, 4th child was in '68, but then going back to summer of '66, I had gone on vacation and came back and found out I got transferred from Oberlin, from St. John's, down to the store at Page and Union, which was an all-black neighborhood. Well, a lot of people, think, with all the turmoil and everything else. Well, of course, I forgot to tell you, my dad had a grocery stores in his background. He had a couple of them, and he had one on Page and near Page and Union, and one near 2 blocks south of Page on Kings Highway. So I was used to, being around the black shopper and all that sort of stuff. So that wasn't a problem. But I was there at Page and Union for a year.
And they didn't consult you? They just said you were being transferred?
Gone. I came back from vacation. I had been transferred, so it was like a promotion and also like a demotion. So I started working there. I was there for a year. The manager was impossible to work with. He was just like a tyrant. So I probably said to hell with it. And Schnucks was looking for more people in '67, so I went with them in July of '67.
What location did you?
I started at the old Bellwood, which was at Chambers and West Florissant, and this was in a store that it was 2 floors. It had an upstairs area that was the warehouse, and had a a belt thing, brought the groceries down a belt to this area that you load them on the trucks.
Conveyor?
A little conveyor, a rubber belt conveyor. And they'd come down, and sometimes the stuff would slide down, and stuff would break and fall all over the floor. And it was a riot too, So I worked there for about a year, and then I got transferred out to the old Florissant store, which is at Highway Party and One Party in Charbonnier. It's now a Sears discount hardware store. And I worked there for about a year and a half, and I kept getting promises of being a grocery manager. When you're younger, you think to be a manager is the big thing to do, and of course you grow older and I never did make I was they call it a dairy manager in frozen food. They call it slang term as a dairy fairy and a frozen food dude. And So I worked in that quite a bit, and let's see. So then, and I got something. I got fed up. It's like I had 12 years in, and I quit like a dummy.
You quit?
Quit. I didn't get the withdrawal.
Job?
Huh?
With a promise of a different job?
I was going to become an insurance agent. That was going to be a glamorous job. You know?
Oh.
Well, anyway, it wasn't such a glamorous job. I mean, the deal is some people are made out to be salesmen, some people aren't. I mean, I could talk a lot, but I can't convince people to do stuff. So after 5 months and going almost broke with 4 kids, well, anyway, I guess I didn't think this out too well, but you know, time marches on. So at Schnucks, I was really, even in 1971, you know, this thing about people working part-time and not making it full-time and all that whole thing was starting. And luckily there was a guy by the name of Gil Vondersuck, I think his name was, he was the personnel manager. And I got back on with Schnucks. I got everything was great. I got full pay and you know, the benefits, the whole works, except vacations. Of course, when you're broke, who cares about a vacation? So I got sent down to the old Hampton Village store, which was at Chippewa and Hampton. And I worked there for about 3 weeks. Of course, that was about the time that Schnucks was taking over Bettendorf. This was in September of 70. So this was February 71, and I came back, and I was basically a third-tier employee because you had all the regular Schnuck people, then you had the Bettendorf people that came in, they were second tier, and the new hires from then on were third tier. Well, I worked at, then I got sent up to Paddock, which was a store built for Bettendorf, but was taken over by Schnucks. It was at 367 in Parker Road. It don't even exist now, it's wiped off the earth. But I was there about a year and a half, and I got transferred out to the old Overland. All these stores were old, you know, because they've been rebuilt into new stores, and some of those new stores are even gone, but to the old Overland store at Burns and Lackland.
Now, during this time, were you still a receiver? Or a dairy?
No, I've been dairy and frozen mainly all the time. Yeah, dairy, and actually when I went to Paddock, I became the very first dairy and frozen food manager combined. That's what they do nowadays, or had been until the recent Schnucks mess up with these famous and bar people, which I think is dumb, but anyway, it's beside the point. So I was at Parker Road, and then I got transferred to Overland, and then Overland, that was a story in itself. I mean, it was a real small store, and well, it's too much to go into right now. There's too many other things to talk about. But I was at Overland from 1972 to 1982.
Oh, that's 10 years.
10 years. And then they closed that store because it was too small. Breckenridge had just opened over on the Rock Road, 9700 Rock Road. And so then I got transferred to downtown.
Wow.
And oh, brother, downtown. And it was like being sent to hell. Because the store is in the middle of downtown, 7th and Olive. And the women had to pay the $4 or $5 a day to park. They didn't have any choice.
Oh my God.
Or come in on a bus. The rest of us had to park 9 blocks away and walk the 9 blocks from like Patrick Center on the north side or Shoto and Broadway on the south side into the store and then walk back out in the evening to get your car. So we worked there for 3 years, and that was another hour story you could tell about that place. I mean, they had two entrances, one on Olive, one on 7th Street, and the little shopping carts were about the size of something a kid would use with his dollhouse. They were really small, and the groceries had to be delivered at night down an alley with a ramp. Oh, I mean, it was unbelievable, you know. And so in 1985, when they finally closed that store, oh brother, it was like manna from heaven, you know. So I got sent from there to the Harvey Mazarin's division, which was down in the south end. So I went to Old South Broadway at 4500 South Broadway near, not too far from where 55 crosses Broadway now. And I was there about a year and a half. And that was, when I was getting transferred, that the next time was Thanksgiving weekend 1986, when Schnucks was taking over the Kroger operation. And they were taking over the store, which used to be a Liberty and then became a Kroger at Chippewa River to Pear. So I first went to Hampton and Gravois for 3 days, and the co-manager at the store was John Smick, and I had worked with John at Broadway, and some guy decided they wanted somebody to work 3 days a week in the store, in grocery or whatever, normal hours, 8 to 4, or 8, whatever, normal hours. And then every Friday night and every Saturday night, they wanted somebody to work from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. the next day to be sort of not to be the sort of the manager on duty, but kind of look over what's going on and make sure people aren't stealing or whatever else, because you only had one checker overnight.
Well, did they have an overnight?
Yeah, we were open 24 hours.
Oh.
And then the deal was, the store was also on the dividing line between Shrewsbury on the west side and the city in the east, and the dividing line was right down the middle of the produce department. I think it was the produce department. Yeah. Well, anyway, so if somebody was stealing or something, they'd call 911, and it'd take a half hour for the city police to get out there to the one door. So they finally switched doors to the Shrewsbury side, so that if they called 911, the Shrewsbury police were there in about 5 minutes to nab the person and hold them for the city to come out to pick them up. So I worked in that store for 10 years. I worked in that store for 14 years, from the day before they opened till 3 weeks after we closed. And then I went from there to, I wanted to get out of paying the city earnings tax. I went to the Webster store at Elm 44 for about 6 months. And Tony Gordon, who was the division manager, really wanted me, I think, at Hampton and Gravois. So I went back to Hampton and Gravois for the last 5 years before I retired.
You were quite a bit all over the place.
Yeah, and it was amazing. And some of the stores I was in were old ones compared to new ones. And then over the years, well, for example, Bettendorf had a store at the old Northland Shopping Center,
Right.
and it got closed. It was closed for years on end. And then when Schnucks took over National in about 1995, National had a store in Jennings at Jennings and West Florissant, and Schnucks had a store in Dellwood, north of Chambers. So when recently they built a new store at Northland and then closed the one in Jennings, closed the one in Dellwood. So it was a lot of stores I was in either closed and went away forever or replaced by other stores and that sort of thing. So.
So when did you retire from the
I
grocery
retired
business?
January 21st, 2006.
And how many years did you have in then with the grocery
Well,
business?
the second time, since I quit, the second time I had over 35 years in the second time. And because the ERISA law, which defines the pensions, didn't come in until 1974, and I had quit in 1970, I wasn't sure I was going to get those other years, but when the pension thing finally got done, they gave me the full pension, so it was nice. It is nice.
Well, you were working there and you had 4 kids, did you say?
Yeah, four kids, all girls.
All girls.
They came along, of course, in unplanned parenthood, and so we lived in there, and the kids all went to. Our Lady of Mercy was the Catholic parish about 2 blocks away from us. We went there to church. Kids they didn't have a school. The kids went to Garrett Elementary School, and they went to Hazelwood High School, Hazelwood West. And we lived there, and of course in 1987, I was working at Chippewa, and I discovered the Latin Mass Church out in Crestwood, and I went away from there and became Latin Mass Catholic in '87, which I've been for the last 25 years. Well, the kids, they lived there and everything, and the daughters all went to, graduated, all went to 4 different universities in the state of Missouri. Number 1, Michelle went to the School of the Ozarks down at Hollister Branson. She's now works for Department of Natural Resources at Merrimack State Park out in Sullivan. Number 2, Karen went to Kirksville, which is now Truman State. She went there for 7 years. She's a doctor and she's a doctor of dermatology. She lives out in the Kansas side of Missouri and Kansas City. Number 3, Nancy went to Mizzou, and she got her bachelor's, but then got a master's later in University of Illinois Springfield. She lives in Payne, Illinois, with her husband. We got a total of 7 grandkids among the kids 2, 3, and 4, and she lives with her husband on 5 acres out near Payne. And number 4, she went to Southwest Missouri State, which is now another named school, and she became an attorney, and she's the staff counsel for the Western Circuit Court of Appeals in Kansas City.
Well, it sounds like your daughters have all done very well for themselves.
Yeah, pretty much.
But none of them live here.
No, I live here. I'm leaving day or so from now to go to Kansas City. First granddaughter number 1, she's 17. She's starting as Romeo and Juliet out in the high school she goes to out there.
She's not playing the part of Romeo.
She's not playing the part of Romeo, she's Juliet.
Yes. Good.
Yeah.
So Dave, from everything you've told us, it sounds like you really have not lived in Bridgeton.
Never lived in Bridgeton.
And you never worked in Bridgeton?
Never worked in Bridgeton.
Well, what is your Bridgeton connection?
Bridgeton connection has to do with streetcars and the streetcar vitality that built Bridgeton in the old days.
Maybe we could talk about that a little bit. Now,
Okay.
how did you become interested in streetcars?
Well, I think it goes like this. I told you about July 22nd, 1940, but I didn't tell you about July 20th, 1940, and that my mom used to go down to Wellston, which was the main shopping hub of the area east of St. John's, and she was riding on the 65 Woodson Road streetcar the day before I was born. And of course, going down the hill from Carson Road to Narmby Drive, it's a long stretch. It goes down the hill, cars are bouncing like this all around, and probably helped bring me out, and I think that helped. Over the years, not only knowing the streetcars there, but my dad running the stores all the time, we didn't go out as a family very often, and my Uncle Clarence Werner, took me around. I think he was a closet railpan, he never did really say, but he took me on the various streetcar lines to ride around the city, like the Creve Coeur line out to Creve Coeur Lake, and over to Illinois, on the Illinois Terminal, ran over to Granite City, and these sort of things. So that thing built up in my mind, and then, of course, when I joined the WFMP in '53, then that brought me into contact with other people that knew general railroading and so forth, and other people networking that knew about streetcars. Well, I've always been interested in streetcars. I started taking pictures and movies starting in 1957 of the streetcar lines that were left. There were about six different lines left in St. Louis, and then in 1984 or so I took over writing a newsletter called Whistle. Well, I named it in a contest, but I named the newsletter Whistle Talk, and I've been writing and editing that since 1984 up till now every month. And back in about this is 20, whatever year it is, I don't know. About 15 years ago, one of the guys from the WFMP was a videographer at Channel 9, and Jim Kirchner, who does The Living St. Louis, approached him if he knew anybody that had movies of streetcars. Well, he pointed them out to me, and I in turn pointed out 15 or so other people that had taken streetcar movies, and they put together a program for Channel 9 called I can't even think of the name of it right now. I've been talking too fast.
That's okay.
It's called Ride of a Lifetime, and it's a 30-minute movie, and it tells about streetcars developing. And one of the figures in that program is Dave Young, who's written several books on St. Louis. And one thing he described in that program, which really outlines of streetcars how they were or would not have been, is that if streetcars which started being developed in 1891, if they had been developed like 10 years later, and automobiles, which started coming around in about 1904, if they had been developed 10 years earlier, there may not have been the streetcars that we knew it. So living in St. John's, I was always fascinated with, even as a little kid, I got to ride on the Woodson Road line down to downtown, down to Wellston and other places, and just started riding the streetcars and everything, and then building up the history in my mind and what was where and that sort of thing. And of course, back in April 2005, I went over to China for 3 weeks to see steam locomotives. I went with different groups. Well, the Chinese had built a new railroad north of Beijing, about 300 miles through Inner Mongolia, and this railroad was built about 500 miles long, and they had, instead of buying $3 million brand new diesels, there was about 50 surplus $50,000 steam locomotives in China. So they brought these steam locomotives up to run on this line, and the locomotives were built to U.S. prototype. I mean, they looked just like the locomotives here with knuckle couplers and the whole bit. And the rail fans from all over the world flocked to China to see the last steam railroad in the world, running for all those miles. So I didn't think I'd ever go over there, but I finally did. And just before I went over there, a fellow by the name of Ray Gale, through another fellow by the name of Don Sarno, had gotten sketches from a guy by the name of George Fail. Ray Gale is G-E-H-L, Fail is F-E-H-L. This George Fail had been an architect in St. Louis, and he went, there's no way this guy could have ever been married, he wouldn't have had the time. He went out and sketched all 500 miles of the Illinois terminal, all over Illinois. I mean, every foot of it. Wires, sketches of the cars, stations, on and on and on. And then he also did a 100-page, all these sketches. He sketched all the, not the streetcars that ran on the street, but all the streetcars that ran on dirt, basically, that we call a private right-of-way, of all the streetcar lines in St. Louis. And so, Ray Gale was on, used to be on this Jim White show on KMOX, and George Fail heard about it, so they got together. And George was getting up in years. He was born in 1905, I think. This is 1991. So I guess he either got paid off from Ray or whatever, but Ray got the sketches, and between him and Don, they put the Illinois terminal sketches on pages that, there's so many pages, there's four 200-page volumes of the Illinois terminal and one small 100-page volume of St. Louis Public Service. And so they came out with these sketchbooks in '95, and they sold them for a while. And then, like I said, in April 2005, Don Sarno had died. Ray was in the Missouri Veterans Home, and I thought, well, I guess I could sell these things. So I made a deal with Ray, and I pay his wife, still, Ray's dead, pay his wife a small royalty on each book sold. And even though it's a very small niche market, at least they're available to people that want them. And so I started selling these things, and of course, I'm getting to the end of my, where we're going with this whole string. Start asking questions.
Well, Dave, I just wonder if some people now, especially younger people, understand what exactly is a streetcar. Can you tell us what is the basic, information about a streetcar? What was the point? What were they used for?
Well, they were really started to go from point to point. The steam railroads had trains that ran, let's just roughly say from Wellston to St. Charles, even that's a short distance. The Wabash, you could get on a train over in, let's say, Ferguson, which is north of Wellston, and you could ride to St. Charles, but there were no intermediate stops. So streetcars came along, and they ran on less, not as heavily built track, And of course, they had the wire overhead for the propulsion.
What do you mean? What was the wire
The
overhead?
the streetcars were powered by electricity.
Oh,
And they have this thing they call the trolley pole, which is like plugging, like you plug your, plug an iron into the wall. You took the trolley pole and they put it up on this wire, and the streetcar was propelled. The electricity came through the wire into the streetcar, and then the streetcar went along on the track.
and it was kind of like a bus where it
It was
would
like a
make
bus.
stops?
It was like a bus, but it was on tracks. Well, the bus needs a paved road, and there was hardly any paved roads at that when streetcars came out. I mean, I don't know, the paved road thing didn't really come along until about 1920 when the United States government decreed about roads around the United States.
So the streetcar was kind of like a forerunner of the public service transportation?
Yeah, streetcars were that sort of thing. And in the cities, they were like built up as public form of transportation. And then besides streetcars, they were called interurban, which is a Latin word meaning between cities. And there was also a lot of electric railroads built between cities to provide this transportation for local things, where a streetcar could stop every couple hundred feet or something and pick up somebody or whatever, whereas the railroads had to go from town to town.
Well, how much do you remember it cost to ride a streetcar?
Well, I mean, back in when when people were only making a certain amount, it might have been 3 cents at the beginning or something like that. Well, I know, but you think about the like even myself in 1960, I was making about $132 gross a week, but your electric bill is only like $15 a month, and gas bill might be $10 a month, and and I can't remember how much eggs, bread, and all that stuff was, but it's all relative. I mean, somebody making $600 a week now, and they pay 5 times whatever the amount was for the milk or whatever else you're buying. So
Now, while you were working in all these different grocery stores, did you had your own car?
oh yeah, I had my own car. I started out with a 55 Chevy, and then the hell did I get? I guess I had then I got a 66 Ford. I had that for a while. I had a 69 Ford, and
So you didn't need to rely on
No.
the public service transportation to get to work. Now, what
Right.
about your wife? Did she have a car available?
well, we only had the one car for a while, and she stayed home with the kids, I guess, till they started getting to be around 14 years old, and then she went to work for Ferguson Machine Company in customer service or whatever.
Did she drive a car?
Oh yeah, she drove a car. We got another one, but at the time I don't remember what it was.
No, that's okay.
I mean, I could remember if my mind wasn't run like a clock. I'm trying to remember all this stuff.
Well, we appreciate all the facts and the dates and everything that you do remember. That's
Yeah.
quite a lot.
Yeah.
So,
The main story for Bridgeton is
Yeah.
going from Bridgeton to Wellston and going from Bridgeton
Yeah.
to St. Charles
Okay.
for shopping.
All right. Well, the line that came out from near Wellston to the car barn shops where the cars were repaired and all that stuff was at Brown Road and the Rock Road, and then they built the line out all the way to St. Charles, going across the bridge in St. Charles, which was built in 1904, and the cars ran across the bridge. I think they ran up to a point and had a ferry before 1904 when the bridge was being built. And then they ran across the bridge into St. Charles. The farmers out here used it, not really to take their produce to market, because most of them used a wagon to go into town, like Pruitt's and some of those people. But other people, I mean, could get on the car and ride back and forth. But because like the roads were still bad news back in the old days, where the streetcar ran the streetcar ran on the right of way where the Rock Road runs now, from roughly 270 out to Earth City Expressway, or whatever you want to call it.
And on the streetcar, there was a driver?
Yeah, there was, well, the driver was called the motorman, and then they had a guy, another guy called the conductor that collected the fares. And because it was just, well, that's just the way it was set up.
What were the dates, do you think, of the streetcars? Like, when was the inception of it? When were streetcars maybe started, you
You're
think?
talking about out here? Well, they built it around 1902, 1903, and it ran out here until right in the middle of the Depression. It went off in 1932. So.
And then what? Then when did they kind of cease to be used?
Well, the streetcars kept going in St. Louis. It's just that the outer end, just about the time that people were starting to move out here into this area, suburban-wise, the streetcars were going off because the other thing is with streetcars, they had to maintain their own the right of way. They had to maintain their own tracks. They had to maintain the electricity, the wires, the generating electricity, and all that sort of thing. Whereas when they finally built the road, you had competing bus lines then, and the competing bus line ran on the pavement. They had to pay for the bus and the fuel, but they didn't have to pay for any other upkeep. The roads and everything were provided for them, so that was one of the factors that I guess you might say did in the streetcar that didn't have a lot of population running on it.
How many people could ride on a streetcar at one time?
Oh, probably. I mean, sitting down, I would say, maybe 50 to 60.
That many?
Yeah. Well, there's about usually 12 or 13 double seats on each side of the car. So that's so that many. Of course, if you had rushes, I mean, people still had to stand, and then of course the St. Charles line, was truncated back into and it was what's called a double end operation, or point to point, where the streetcar went across the bridge into the terminal in St. Charles, and the conductor would go out and pull the trolley pole down on the front end and put it up in the back, so they go back the other way. There was no loop like they had, because they built a loop at Coles Avenue because the people were moving out from the city out along the Rock Road, so they used put a loop in at Coles Avenue for the other streetcars, which only were single end. They would go one way and they go around a loop and go back. They didn't have to take the trolley pole.
And where is Coles Avenue?
Coles Avenue is roughly it's in Breckenridge Hills.
Okay.
About, if you go west on the Rock Road from Edmondson, you'll notice there's a little jog in the road, and that's where the streetcar line ended. At one time, it's where
Schnucks store right there, isn't it?
yeah, right where where Schnucks Breckenridge used to be, just west of there.
Could you go all the way downtown if you lived?
Well, and that's what they did. And one of the big things in 1923 was, of course, the St. Charles line that ran from Wellston to St. Charles had two divisions. One by Normandy High School ran up Lucas and Hunt Road up towards National Bridge. They had cemeteries and things along there. And then they also had a division that ran off the Rock Road at what is now Cypress and ran over to the west edge of the airport. And in 1923, they had these air races where they had like a pylon built up, and these airplanes would come out and fly a big loop around these pylons as horses doing a race nowadays and that sort of thing. And the people, airplanes were always a big new thing, and they flocked I mean, the line had been single track, they made 2 tracks on it, and these happened several times in 1923. And people would get on a streetcar up at Grand and way up in North St. Louis, and some of the streetcars had bigger motors on them that could pull a trailer, which was a car that didn't have any motors in them. So they'd have these 2-car trains would run all the way down the Grand Line, then all the way out the Wellston line to Wellston, and then on to the St. Louis, St. Charles, and Western, which is the name of that line that ran to St. Charles, and they ran on that out to where roughly Rock Road and Cypress is now. A couple on going on that track and run over to the air races there at that I can't remember the name of that area is right there. That I get Pattonville and Bridgeton and all that mixed up. So
Well,
that was Pattonville, Bridgeton Terrace in later
maybe you
years.
could use as a landmark the part of Lindbergh where it goes under the railroad tracks. It's
Well, that's right. That's Robertson. So that's
right. But that's where they eventually built the first terminal building at Lambert Airport.
yeah. They built the first terminal right there, but that's still considerably north of where this they ran.
What do you think, Dave? Excuse me.
Yeah.
What do you? I know you're so knowledgeable and interested in then the streetcar and then the
Trains.
railroad.
Yeah.
But what do you think about the Metrolink that we use now? And the Metrolink does much the same thing. It just kind of goes all the way one way and then doesn't it?
Yeah,
And then
right.
it goes all the way back
Right,
without being
right.
in a loop, right?
No loop.
You
no.
can go all the way downtown, come all the way out to the airport,
Right.
and then but it doesn't go in a loop.
There's no loop. No. It's you just go to the other end. The pantograph goes up and the other one comes down.
And in the Metrolink, they rely on their own tracks.
They rely on their own tracks. The Metrolink was built on the old Wabash tracks because they were available for one thing, and they had to be built for a certain amount. Actually, the Metrolink was built fairly cheap at the time because a lot of other places had to come up with a local share of cash or whatever, and they worked out a unique deal downtown where they traded. John Roach was which is a planner or whatever, came up with a novel idea of trading the value of the right-of-way of the Wabash Railroad as the local match to Washington for the local match here in St. Louis. And they took the Eads Bridge, they traded the terminal on the Eads Bridge, and the city of St. Louis on the MacArthur Bridge. So they did a trade. They traded the MacArthur Bridge for the Eads Bridge and used the value of the Eads Bridge as the local match to run the trains over into Illinois. And Metrolink is actually the longest one-way trip of any light rail system in the United States, running from Lambert all the way out to Scott Air Force Base Shiloh at the other end. It's 38 to 40 miles one way.
So kind of, in a way, the Metrolink kind of replaced.
Not really.
No, you don't think that.
It replaced in that it goes fast and it hauls lots of people, but it's not the grid that public transportation once was in St. Louis, because you had streetcars running practically on every street east and west, not every street, but every major street east and west, and every major street north and south, and people could just walk a couple blocks and get on a streetcar, pay their fare, get a transfer, which is a little piece of paper, and you'd ride down, say on the Grand Line to Easton Avenue and give the transfer to the motorman on the Wellston line and ride out to Wellston. Whereas the Metrolink rides from one place to the other, but you still have to have either feeder things with feeder buses, with the buses coming in at various stations, or people riding in automobiles dropping somebody off to get on the train. And it runs fast and it does a good job, but it's still not replacing the streetcars as the streetcars used to be. And the buses don't really do it either that much, because it's people riding on a fixed rail in a fixed location, and things develop around it. Same thing with this new loop trolley that's going to be built down Delmar and DeBoliver.
What's the purpose of that?
It's basically as a tool to further the property, rebuild the property along Delmar. Joe Edwards started the whole thing, and he's actually the godfather behind this whole thing. And he built, he had the Blueberry, what do they call it, the Blueberry Inn, Blueberry,
Yeah.
whatever it is, the tavern thing. And he built it from there, and then he was able to buy the various theaters, and he built a new hotel down there, a new bowling alley, and east of Skinker. You know, and it's sort of like it's like when you put the zoysia grass in the ground, zoysia grass eventually takes over everything else.
Right.
And the idea is to take the crumbling, demographically disabled, as I call it, areas east of the Wabash Station, and hopefully to bring them back to some sort of flowering. And you got that section from Goodfellow east to Bolivar, which needs redoing. And of course, under Bolivar is pretty nice. And just to the streetcar line makes it an established vehicle in the street. Whereas a bus, you can take the bus and move it away someplace else, and the people don't know it's there. So the money's there. The streetcar will be built no matter what's going on, and this whole Archibald thing and everything else goes away. I mean, he was involved in it, but it's still going to be built.
Is it going to be called a trolley or a streetcar?
It'll be called. It's called the Loop Trolley, but the name trolley is mainly an East Coast type name. Loop trolley and streetcar, exactly the same thing. Exactly. It's just that in St. Louis it's always been called a streetcar. In Toronto it's always been called a streetcar. In New Orleans it's always been called a streetcar. In Philadelphia it's called a trolley. In Pittsburgh it's called a streetcar or trolley. So it's wherever you are, it's what they call it is what it is.
What about in San Francisco?
San Francisco it's known as
Cable cars.
no, that's cable car. That's completely separate. Cable car was there, but the streetcars have always been there too. But whenever you see a movie, you always see the cable car, because that's San Francisco. San Francisco has 5 streetcar lines that's always been there. They just transitioned from different kinds of cars, and they just built a brand new one on the 3rd Street line, which runs right next to that AT&T Park where they just had the World Series. It runs right down in front of the thing, and then goes down 3rd Street to another area. But San Francisco's, I mean, their people thing is a little bizarre, I guess, in certain ways, but they sure have a good operating system there. The best system in North America, though, is Toronto. I just came back from several days up there, and that's unbelievable.
Why do you say that?
Oh my God! Toronto has 11. They have 8 streetcar lines, 3 more on other versions of a different line. The 8 streetcar lines haul 265,000 people a day, just the streetcars, not including the big diesel commuter line that runs about 8 different lines, and the subways that run all over the place. They haul close to 3 million people a day on their public transportation.
Wow.
And it kind of stays in the general area, so it's amazing. I mean, you go up there and where we stayed at Dundas and Young Street. I mean, St. Louis is such a small downtown, and you get up there and it seems like the downtown just go on and on and on and on, you know. And some of the streetscapes, they have like you see in Hong Kong or someplace else with these big 4-story ads running down the side of the buildings. That's the things they got there, and of course diversity. I mean, you'll be riding along on one streetcar line and come through, be light, and you get down an area where there's a lot of Chinese living, and the streetcars are just bulged. It looks like the Grand Line used to be a streetcar every block, you know, waiting to move.
So in some areas, the streetcars are still
going strong.
Yeah. Well, Dave, I think our time has about come to an end, and I really appreciate you, explaining this to us. And I think there's going to be a lot of young people that really don't know what streetcars are. I've never experienced it. I've never ridden on one myself, and So I appreciate your
Did
talking about it.
I guess we never get around to showing a picture of one, did we?
You can hold on, well, thank you.
We should have done that, but we didn't think about it.
Put it down so you can see your face.
Oh, down here, okay. Anyway, and then Metrolinx on the back.
Now, hold the book up a little bit more.
Yeah,
Hold the book up a little more. There you go.
There's
And-
Metrolinx,
Yeah, and now turn.
and there's the
Yeah.
streetcars. Those are called the PCC streetcars, they were built, they were the last ones we had in St. Louis, and there will be one just like this running at the Museum of Transport very soon.
Well, thank
Very
you,
good.
thank you.
thank you, Dave.